All right. Well, I am so honored to have Abel and Ganelle Sutton with me today. Welcome, guys.
Thank you, Pastor
Thank
Scott.
you so much. Glad to be
Yeah.
here with you.
I've been wanting to get you guys to just kind of sit down with me and let's talk and get to know each other better and also hear a little bit of your kind of your story and what you guys are doing for a while. And this is the
Absolutely.
first time we've been able to get our schedules together. So
Yes.
thank you for saying yes
Yeah,
and
absolutely
coming out
welcome.
today.
Thank
Yeah.
you for the invitation.
Oh.
We're honored to be here.
Well, you're welcome. You know, there's a lot of people listening who have no idea who Ganelle and Abel are. Okay, so give us a little kind of a background of who you are, a little bit about maybe where you grew up, how'd you guys meet, what you're doing now, just kind of a big overview. Kind of introduce yourself to the audience.
I'll let him do it. 'Cause
Okay.
I can get long-winded
Well,
without.
Sure.
well, I was gonna say I was gonna allow her to do it because she's the storyteller
Right,
and,
right.
and the writer. You
I
all know
am,
that.
and that's
Yeah.
the problem. Yeah, I'm a storyteller.
Yeah, I
you
want
know?
to get I want to get into that book because
Yeah.
I want people to pick up that book if they
Okay,
can and
all
read it.
right.
So we'll get into that a little bit later.
sure.
So tell me
Well-
who are you guys?
Well, I am a native of Elizabeth City,
Okay.
North Carolina. I've been in Elizabeth City all my life, other than for college. I'm a graduate of Elizabeth City, of East Carolina University, Elizabeth City, East Carolina University. But of course, my parents are Ernest and Valeria Sutton. Many people know us as the Suttons or the
Yeah.
Faithway Doves. We grew up singing and traveling, doing gospel music.
Oh, let me ask. I got to ask on that. How early was it when you started traveling and singing?
Oh, man.
How old were you?
I was probably about 7 or 8 years old,
Really?
or
And
younger.
you sang at that time, or did you just
Oh,
go
yeah.
and just watch?
Listen, the way it's 7 boys, 3 girls, and the way
Seven boys,
seven
three
boys,
girls.
3 girls, and the way our parents raised us is when we got old enough to stand, we had to be on the stage with the family.
Wow.
that-
And everybody sings.
and everybody sings or plays an instrument or does something. But
Wow.
we traveled for many years across the country, even out of the country, singing gospel music and with our family and everything. Of course, church kid, raised in the church all of our lives. Our mother actually took us to church. My dad is a pastor now, but our mother took us to church, and we were raised in a small little house with 7 boys, 3 girls, mom and dad, and there were times that my dad was working, and we had one car at the time, and we lived a couple of miles away from the church, and my mom would have all her 10 children pushing us to church in the stroller, some on the stroller, some on the leg, some on our back, some walking, some other older kids holding the younger kids, and we went to church, and that was our lives. Church was our life. We went to church Sunday night, Wednesday night, Friday night, all day Saturday, and back again Sunday night. I mean,
Really?
that was our lives growing up. So the crazy thing is, just to segue into Ganelle and I, is our churches used to fellowship years ago. I mean, we still fellowship today, but our church, that's how we first met each other, not in this capacity,
Yeah.
of course.
In a different city because
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not from
Yeah,
here.
she's not
Right.
from Elizabeth City. She's from New Bern, and she'll talk about that. But our churches used to fellowship together, and we used to see each other in passing.
Yeah.
And I always like people to know that Ganelle is a little older than me. So I'll let her tell a little bit about her upbringing as well. But she came to visit us when I was 16 and she was 19, and she caught my eye, and she was just so gorgeous. I said, I got to get to know her. So, I had built up my confidence a little bit, and I said, you know what, I'm gonna really make my move. Now they slide.
Now, did you have moves? And where did you learn moves when you
my-
grew up in church all the time?
He's about to tell the
My
move.
feet was the move, just to moving towards her. But now they got the DMs. We didn't have
Oh,
DMs
yeah,
at that
yeah,
time.
yeah.
You had to open your mouth and
Right.
actually introduce yourself. So she had come to the church. She was in college, and I was 16, still in high school. And I saw her, and I said, I got enough strength and confidence. I went over to her, and after the service, after spending time with the Lord, I had other intentions on my mind. I went over to her, and I simply asked her how old she was. And she told me she was 19, and broke my heart.
Yeah.
Because I said, there's no way this 19-year-old woman is going to want anything to do with this 16-year-old boy. And that was actually,
So I said, "How old are you?" And he said, "Oh," and walked away. And then that was I don't remember how we actually. How do we actually
You came back later on.
Yeah,
Later
some
on.
years later, I
Yeah.
came back, and by this time, he was at East Carolina
Yeah.
with me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I just
Did you guys know you were going to school together, or
No.
you saw each other again at East
Someone
Carolina?
told me that Pastor Sutton's son was at East Carolina, but I never saw him, and on campus, never saw him.
Did
on
you know
campus.
she was there?
I didn't know till later on.
Wow.
And I give her a chance because I want to share something.
Okay.
So I graduated already, and
Yeah.
I heard the Faithway Doves, his family group, they were having a concert there. I came back to East Carolina for the concert because I was in the gospel choir and everything. And they did their concert, and I said, well, I'm going to go to Elizabeth City the next day, which was a Saturday, and go to church. And I went to church, and Bishop Sutton came up to me after church and said, oh, I heard you go to school with my son. I said, I already graduated. He said, okay, do you have a job? And I was working at the newspaper in New Bern at the time. I said, I just quit. He said, well, they're hiring for teachers here. I'm like, okay, why he's telling me I don't want to be a teacher? And he came and asked me, he came up to me after service and spoke again, and he was a little older and everything, and I was just like in awe of this man now. You know, he's a whole man.
Well, I got to back up the story a little bit.
I
Scott.
gotta back up.
We did have an interaction when we was in college
Oh, we
together. Some mutual friends of ours, some of the saints from the church,
Yes, that's right.
actually had
That's
come
right,
to
that's
Elizabeth
right.
City to
That's right.
to one of our concerts, the
Yeah.
Faithway
Yeah,
Doves
yeah,
concerts,
yeah.
and they were to take me back. I was still in college, and they were going to give me a ride back to school.
Yeah, we both were. Yeah.
And what they did was, instead of taking me to Greenville, they took me to their house. They said, well, Ganelle goes to East Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
You can just ride to her with her back to school in the morning. You get some sleep. So that did happen.
Yeah.
She took me back to school.
Yeah.
The next morning, it was a quiet drive. It was like 45-minute ride. It was
Yeah.
quiet drive. I was a little nervous.
I was too.
Act like I was asleep, but I was very much conscious. And I gave her my number, Pastor. And I asked her to call me. She never called.
But who does that? Like, he was supposed to call me.
She never called. I'm still kind of crushed to this.
To this
Married,
day-
5 children.
And he brings it up that I didn't
crushed to
call
this
him.
day. She never called me.
Yeah.
That was my mistake though, because I didn't get her number. I didn't.
Ah.
I was trying to say, look, here's my number if you ever need. Call me sometime. Let's do lunch. She never called.
No. But
Crushed.
God is so strategic and intentional.
Yes, he is.
Because, you know, that didn't happen. I didn't call him. But then after we were still on campus together, still never saw him. After I graduated, of course, I went to this other concert when they were there. And I saw him. I was like, wow, you know, I really liked him a lot. And so I came to church that Sabbath all the way from New Bern to Elizabeth City. And he came to my car just to say hi. Bishop asked me if I had a job. He said, well, we're hiring for teachers. And I didn't pay him any mind because I'm a journalist. And I'm like, I'm not going to be a teacher. That's a different path. I went all the way back home. This strange number popped up on my phone. It was him. He called just to make sure I got home okay. But before that call, I went online, just curiosity. They're hiring for teachers. I didn't want to be a teacher, but it's like I was on autopilot, you know, operating on autopilot. I filled out the application. I don't know why. But the application is now filled out and it's out there. He calls and makes sure I'm home okay. We did not get off the phone until the next morning. I saw the sun come up. And on the phone that night, he said, you're my girlfriend. And I said, okay. So now we're actually boyfriend.
That was a move.
Yeah,
That was a move.
That was a move. We're now
18
boyfriend.
years ago.
We're boyfriend and girlfriend
Yeah.
now, and I've never seen him outside of church clothes. I don't really know him, and we just actually committed to being boyfriend. Who does that?
Yeah.
We're now boyfriend, girlfriend, and I don't even. So then 2 weeks later, the school system, Elizabeth City Pasco Tank Public School, called me and said, we have an interview. You know, you want to come for an interview? And I said, sure. The day of the interview, and I'm going to hurry up. There's a hurricane outside. I called to cancel. You know, I can't come because there's a hurricane. It wasn't bad in Elizabeth City. So they just said, you can come at 2. I'm like, at 2? It's still going to be a hurricane. My mom said, get in the car, just pray. We got in the car. I came for my interview. Dr. Linwood Williams called me and said, you got the job. And I was like, well, I guess I'm moving to Elizabeth City. And that's how it happened.
Well, I'll tell you something phenomenal. Her that I love to hear. Her grandfather.
Yep.
You used to always call her his little teacher. So he spoke that and saw that in our life.
He never called me my name my whole life.
Really?
He called me school teacher my whole life.
Well, she's definitely a teacher by heart.
That's amazing.
And definitely has a calling to teach and to write and so many different things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I've had the honor of hearing you teach and here at our church a few times, and then I got a chance to be with you guys a few Saturdays ago, and you were teaching when I walked in, and you always do such a great job.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now I got to ask, do you still kind of feel that way, where you just kind of wonder what happened, and you got married and kids, and you just kind of go, what's going on here?
Yes. I really do. Like, what was that? Mhm.
You still feel that way?
Felt that way today.
And here we are. We got married October the 21st, 2007.
Yeah.
We've been married 14 years this year, make 15 years, and we have 5 children.
5 kids.
5 children: Abel, Micah, Eden, Lily, and Willow. And it is like my mama. She calls, go down the road till she get to who she's looking for. And it's a beautiful thing. I don't even remember life without kids at this point.
Yeah.
Now, did you both already have a goal of having a lot of children?
We said we were going to have 7 boys.
Oh, 7 boys.
Yes.
Let me tell you something.
So you got a ways to go.
No,
you don't have
he
7
quit
boys.
on me.
Well,
He quit.
I read.
He dropped out.
You know,
You tapped out. That's
I
it.
saw
I'm done.
7, and then I counted. It was 7 of us. I said, "That's the number I saw." It wasn't the kids. It was collectively 7. But I tell you something funny. I tell people all the time. I've always wanted 7 children. I've been a part of. My family is big. I've always wanted 7 children. And if you're dating a woman that you want to stay around, don't tell her you want 7 children.
Right.
She's probably not gonna agree to that. Most women will. Some will. Most won't. But anyway, one day we were having lunch at Applebee's, probably sharing a meal because that's all the money I had. One thing about it, I never tried to be something I didn't. I said, listen, I got this $20. You better take it because it might not be another 20 for a little while. So, but we were dating. We were having lunch, and the subject came up about children, and she said, "I want a big family." And I stood up, but I didn't get too excited because it's just she and her sister in the home. And I said, how big is big? She said, "I want 7 children."
Yeah.
I said, "This is the one. Let's get the preacher and the pastor. Let's do it." So good. So again, she's taught school for 18 years.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm in healthcare, healthcare, hospice care. I've been in hospice care. I've been in healthcare now for about 15 years. Hospice care for about 12 years. And also I do real estate as well, in addition to pastoring and ministering at the church.
Now, was healthcare something you knew you were going to get into? You went to school for it?
I actually went to school for it. I went to East Carolina for health information management, double major health information management, health service management. My goal at the time was to do hospital administration. That's what my goal was, and I found myself in hospice care. Do not ask me how that happened. Definitely didn't plan to go to hospice when I got approached about coming on hospice. I didn't want anything to do with it because when you say hospice in our community, we think about death. You think about call the preacher, call the mortician. It's gonna be quick. But surely hospice has become a part of our ministry. To be able to come along somebody in that time, that part of their journey of their lives, to be able to support them, provide that family sense of family and atmosphere for them and comfort. It just correlates to the ministry calls.
Yeah. Now, had you always planned on being a pastor as well?
You know what? That's a funny story. No.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I know that's his question, but so our churches, we've always fellowship. So he may not have had plans to be a pastor, but Abel has been preaching his whole life.
Yeah.
He was filled with the Holy Ghost at an early age. And I remember as a little girl, he talked about us being 16 and 19 in the church together. But as a little girl, I remember we would, when you're young, when it's time to hear the preaching, we used to dip out one at a time, to go outside and stuff like that while the adults were in there listening to the word. And I remember hearing this little boy up preaching, going off one time when we were in New Bern. And I'll never forget, I asked one of my cousins at church, I was like, "Who is that?" And then she said, "Some little boy in there." And I peeped in the church, and it was Abel up. I don't know what he was preaching, right? And I said, "He needs to go play." Like he needs a childhood.
Well, I fell in love with the Lord and the things of the church at a young age. Again, that was our lives, our life, and I fell in love with it. I mean, even at a young age, it was nothing for me to just have my Bible and be studying and reading the Word of the Lord, and we didn't have access to the information of technology like we have now. You know, just you and the Bible and maybe a Strong's Concordance.
That's a similar childhood of mine.
Yeah.
I had the same kind of passion and desire when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And people had a hard time understanding that.
Yeah.
You have to chalk that up as a God thing.
But
there's just no other
even
way.
with all of that, I never wanted to be a pastor.
Yeah.
I never wanted. It's one of those things that just fell on me. It was definitely a calling from the Lord. I never had a desire to be a pastor, and I never really wanted to be a preacher. I just loved it. It was just a part of me who I was. It wasn't something I was pursuing.
Right.
I just love God. I love the church. I love the Word, and
It really was just
it
you.
evolved
Yeah.
into that. So
How do you balance it all today?
it's tough.
Yeah. Your
It's-
job,
it's-
real estate, 5 children.
Yeah, it's tough.
Do you speak every week?
I speak most weeks.
Most weeks, yeah.
Most weeks I speak. I get up early.
Yeah.
I get up early and stay up late, for sure. And it's tough. It's tough. But I feel like I think we go through 3 seasons of life. I think we go through the season of learning, which is an extended season, should be throughout the duration of our lives, where we're learning, where we're pruning, where we're getting some things, and then you go through that season of labor, that you start to implement those things that you learn, and you start to really put your hands to the plow and really work, and then you'll transition to that season of legacy, where you're the teacher now, and you start to train others to get into that labor field. I think I'm in that labor zone where my hands have to be on the plow, and I have to give it everything I got in this season.
Yep.
And things will change. You know, my children are young. You know, I'm thinking about their future. The scripture says, the godly man leaves an inheritance for his children's children, and that's not just financial.
Yeah.
That's spiritual. That's emotional. That's so many different things. That's leaving that legacy for them in so many different categories. So I feel like I'm in that. God gives me the grace to do it.
Yeah.
You know, I know a lot of people say, how in the world, you know, and seasons will change and pages will turn.
Sure.
But God has afforded me, even with work, you know, the ability to be able to do it, and He graces me to do it, for sure.
That's beautiful. And you know, kids grow up very, very fast.
Yes.
You know, I think
heard.
about our 3. You know, it seemed like I was carting them to school, taking them everywhere, and then they were driving, and then they were gone.
Wow.
And you look back and you think, okay, we must have skipped some
Where did
years
time go?
or something, you know. So fortunately, I had the energy at that time. I don't think I could have done all that today.
Yeah.
But you're right. You're right. The learning, labor, and legacy. I think that's beautiful. Well, listen, I want to turn our conversation kind of sharply. All right.
Okay.
That gives us a little background of who you guys are and kind of what you're about, and you're active in the community and in the church world, and you've been a teacher for 18 years. You just moved away from teaching. Is that right, Ganelle?
I'm still doing my own thing, my writing camp and stuff like that. But as far as like the traditional public school way, I have laid that down.
And what I
for a
find
while.
interesting about you guys is, you know, as you mentioned, you grew up in church, so church has always been a very important central part of your life. But you're also very active in the world. You work a job. You're out there with kids. 18 years of teaching. You see all kinds of kids come through: black, white, Hispanic. You know, wealthy, poor, on and on. You obviously are dealing with in hospice people from different faiths. You know, you're not just living in your own little world. You know, you see the world as it is, and you experience it as it is.
For sure.
And one of the reasons that I wanted to sit down and talk with you guys is because I want to learn all I can about your life and your experiences. Because, you know, I mentioned a moment ago that, you know, you and I are similar in that I had the same kind of passion when I was a kid. My grandmother really instilled in me faith, and my mom did as well. And you know, I was reading the Bible at a young age and had a desire to preach and lead the church. When I was 16, 17, when other kids were, you know, doing other things, I just always had that passion. But so we're similar in that. but we're different. And I'm learning more and more as I get older. I wish I would have understood just how different our worlds are 20 years ago.
Right.
But it's taken me a long time to have my eyes open to the difference in the black community and the white community.
For sure.
And I wanted to hear from you. I want to get a little bit of your experience. So, a question I have is I want to talk through some of the oppression,
Okay.
some of racism that we still experience in 2022 that a lot of people don't think we do. White privilege
Okay.
that I've been aware of more recently probably than ever before. So I'd like for you to take me through a different journey. You took me through your faith journey, but I want you to take me a little bit through a kind of down a different road than what you just described. What is it like, or what was it like for you guys to grow up as a black family in America many years ago when you were kids? How did that feel?
Okay.
What did you experience? Teach me. Tell me a little bit about that journey.
Well, growing up black, you live a life of caution. And by that, I mean the way I know the way I was raised, and I'm sure it's the same even with his dad. What I consider being a prestigious job, of course he wasn't prison warden until Abel was a little older, but he still worked in the prison system for many years, but he's still a black man.
Yeah.
But you live a life of caution. Your grandparents and your parents teach you you don't play freely. I catch myself even now raising my children that way. When the ball roll over in the neighbor's yard, you teach them differently, and it's not conscious. I can't help it. You're not consciously doing it. It's just it's in us because I'm black.
Where did that caution get instilled in you?
The insurance man, back in the day, the insurance people would come to your house. It wasn't like you get your quote online and things like that. So when the white man would come to the house, my grandma would make us sit down and be quiet.
Because he was white?
It felt that way, because if the black pastor came over, if a black person came over, and you got to understand too, my grandparents, I didn't have like nowadays people have young grandparents, but I had like real grandparents, not that, but I had like I had the sewing grandmama and the farmer granddaddy, like they were old, so they grew up in a different time. And my grandmother was a maid. I remember being younger, picking her up from the white ladies' houses and stuff like that. So, it was just different. It was a different kind of like respect and stuff. We were like, it was just different, and I can't explain it. And so even now, I tell my children, when you don't go. I am not raising them to have a paranoid spirit. It's just I have to be careful in this day and age, because they're not going to care that it's Abel Sutton's child or whoever's child. It's the it's the way of the world.
Yeah, it's the way of the world. I will say this: my dad and my mom did two things for us. We were definitely raised to be cautious. When you look at the judicial system, and you go back and you see that African Americans are penalized at a higher degree for the same type of crimes as white counterparts, when African Americans have 13% population in America, but they're 50+% of incarcerations. When you look at that, when you raise in a world where you don't see African Americans in high-profile positions and as politicians. Of course, we're starting to see it evolve now, but things start evolving based upon being aware of these of what's going on. When you don't see, when you see the economic difference or challenge between the average income amount for African American households and white households and different things of that nature when we look at police brutality, and we see the different things that we see where from and it's not just media, it's the things that are actually happening where your white counterparts are given a warning or tased and for the same experience, and you see African American man that is shot and asked questions later. When you grow up in a world where you see this stuff, and I say my parents raised us twofold. They protected us from a lot of it, but they also made us aware of a lot of it. One of the things my dad did for us is we went to what's called the LCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Dr. Martin Luther King's organization, and the NAACP. We actually sang. We talked about our family singing. We actually was exposed to these things. When we would march on Martin Luther King Day, and he would take us to D.C., and we will hear these stories. In the African American community, we are programmed differently based upon statistical facts that's hard to rebut. So when this becomes the history, when you live with this history, you got to understand we were raised in a world where we felt like we had to do more just to get enough. Where it felt like it wasn't an easy or level playing field. So you live with that fear from an economic standpoint, from an education standpoint, from a police standpoint, from you just name it. You live with that cautiousness, as my wife was saying, as an African American in the world. And you got to think the civil rights movement wasn't that long ago.
It's not.
Jim Crow wasn't that long ago. I remember when I first started working, one of my first jobs was downtown, and my mom was fearful.
Yeah.
This was just 17, 18.
Remember we were going on a date.
Yeah, we were going, and my mom said, well, y'all make sure you all don't stay downtown too late. Because my mother grew up in a generation where they didn't go to certain parts downtown. They grew up in a generation where you had the two different fountains of water, where the blacks only and the whites only, and the blacks had to go to the back to be served and had
So
to.
that's your parents.
That's my parents.
Not long ago at all.
That's not long ago at all. Right. So you think about that. Now there's two ways that you can respond to it. You can either climb up and she'll be angry, and there's some righteous anger that comes with that, but that anger should not stunt our ability to progress in the world. You see what I'm saying? And cause us to go in a clam shell and not thrive. And that's why I say my parents did twofold. They made us conscious of it, but they also promoted our consciousness to pivot around the challenges or disparities that are potentially possible for us. Now that's where that faith came in, is that faith is not ignoring the reality, but believing in God to be able to cause you to persevere through those realities, so where it doesn't stunt your growth and cause you to live in a deep side of anger.
Right.
Do you still feel cautious?
I still feel cautious. It's ingrained in our culture.
And I want to make, real clear, Pastor Scott, that, all this social media stuff that we hear about lately, that's just the tip of the that's just what we've been made aware of. This is something.
Give me an example.
Like the things that we've been seeing, like George Floyd and
Right.
things like that.
Right.
Because now that we have cell phones, we can see it. But
This has been going on for
I want
many,
people to
many
understand
years.
this is what
Right.
we live, because we tease his mom, and my mom has always done it too. We tease his mom that when and I don't know if I will keep it real.
Yeah.
When they get stopped by the police, we tease them that my mom used to do it too. Like they used to act like a slave. Like my mom would. This has been years. It's not new. Where they would, yes sir. Like whereas, anybody else would get stopped, they probably would just. It would be normal to them. I just am going to get my license registration that the man is asking for.
So you just had to play the game sometimes.
Yeah, but my mother, whenever she would get stopped, knowing she's not a criminal, God-fearing church lady, a preacher, not that this means anything, but dressed down to sweeping the floor, she knew everything. Her car wasn't stolen. She doesn't have any drugs or anything. But even with all of that, there was still a fear. She would literally tell Nina and I, y'all sit up straight and look straight ahead. And she didn't know she was putting fear in us. It was second nature. Y'all, and then when the police would come to the car, y'all don't move. And she would, yes, sir, to the max.
And it's not just a simple respect for authority, because they taught us respect for authority,
Right.
but it went to another degree
Yes.
as well, for a fear for your life.
And you said that instilled a fear in you as a child.
Yes.
for sure.
They didn't mean to do that. Your
They didn't
parents
mean
do
to,
that.
but like even now, and I brought up the ball going into the neighbor's yard, but something simple as a ball going into the neighbor's yard, my son was about to go get it, and I don't know, it was second nature. Something to me said, wait, Michael, I'll go with you. Why am I doing that? But
These are realities, and even down in the real estate, I've known people who said that when the appraisal came to their house, that they had their white friends to stand in for them, in a sense,
Yeah.
or
and
change the pictures in the house.
the pictures to get a higher appraisal for the house. And there's been many articles written about that, and and that's not say every individual, but that's that cautiousness.
But here you two are successful, educated, married for nearly 20 years, 5 children, well known in their area, respected in their area. You still feel caution.
You still feel cautious. You can never let your guard down.
Absolutely.
That's how we live. You never let your guard down.
See, that's what I'm saying about a different world. I've been pulled over many times, not many times, but 5 or 6 different times, for speeding or traffic, a headlight out or whatever it is, always been treated with respect. I had no concern, even to express frustration that I was pulled over, to the officer who comes to the window. Sir, do you know why I pulled you over? I don't know. You tell me. I'm not going to admit anything.
Yeah.
But that's very arrogant in some ways. Very confident that I could talk to an officer that way. I have no fear of reaching in the glove compartment and pulling out my registration or my wallet or whatever. But I have friends, black friends, who tell me that is not their reality. That's not their world. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
That's not your world.
Absolutely, and that's what you say when you say, do you still feel like that? Yes, it's a sad reality, but it is what it is. We always feel, you can never forget that you're black, because a history forgotten is a history repeated, and we live with that consciousness. That doesn't mean we've had great interaction. That doesn't mean I'm going to treat you differently.
Right.
But I always have to live in the reality, even on my job. I am a vice president on my job and in the upper leadership, and it's lonely. It's lonely because I'm the only, in my particular division, I'm the only African American in this particular role.
But see, what a lot of white people would say something along the lines of, why are you lonely? There's people there obviously that are white or different, but you're saying you're lonely because there isn't another black person in a similar role?
For sure. I mean,
because of culture, because of understanding how you feel.
Right.
There is a division that there's a chasm that just cannot be forded simply because you're friends.
Absolutely. And I listened to Denzel Washington. I think it was. I heard a clip. He was talking about. He directed Fences and some other
I saw that.
things, and he was talking about the reason why he was the perfect person to do that is because he could relate to the culture.
Yeah.
And someone else probably could do it. Doesn't mean they couldn't do it, but they wouldn't be able to do it well because it's different when you've lived that experience. And it's the same way it works in the workplace or anywhere else. We tend to. It doesn't mean, and you can ask all my counterparts throughout my whole career. It doesn't mean that I have friends from very different angles in life, but when you're in a room and you don't have someone who looks like you that have a similar story, there's just different way that we interact, different way that we think, different experiences, different. It's just like, someone who's not black, typically, unless you intentionally, you're not going to invest in studying the black culture unless you intentionally do it.
That's
Why?
right.
Because it doesn't relate to your everyday life.
That's right.
So when you have when you don't have a representation for that particular culture, how can you really serve that culture to the degree for what their needs may be? And that's why I think diversity is important, and from many different angles.
I think from, I certainly can't speak, obviously, for all white people, and white culture, but, I've grown up in America my whole life, in my 50s now, pastor a church for here 21 years. Their churches for 5 or 6. So I've been almost 30 years in ministry. I've had a lot of people come through our church, black, white. And I can say that when you mention about education, like becoming aware of the black culture, and unless you intentionally study it, you'll never know. When I was a white kid growing up, we would have a segment of black history, or we would have a chapter in the book. It's almost embarrassing to say that within our culture, it was almost like, well, that's just being forced on us.
Yeah.
We have to study 2 or 3 people who are black, who are famous, and get it out of the way, because really it's all the white famous people that really made everything happen. But we have to almost this token kind of to the black culture, and it's embarrassing to admit that, but that is the way it's looked at. I can't speak for all white people, but that's the way it was for me. And I grew up ignorant. I mean, ignorant of the contributions black people made to our country, the inventions that they made, the education that they brought, the books that they have written. Recently, I've been doing what I can to just read black authors. I've got a 500-page book on all of Martin Luther King's speeches and sermons, and I'm working my way through it. Watching literally YouTube videos on everything from Martin Luther King Jr. to Malcolm X to James Baldwin to just
Garvey.
Doing everything I can to just, and I'm sitting here going, why didn't somebody tell me this? Why didn't I understand this? It's sad to me.
Yeah, and that's even from a secular perspective.
Yeah.
Even if we bring it even to the church.
Yes.
All of the imagery that we've seen, from God to Jesus on the cross, to all of the books, the hymnals, all of those things were whitewashed.
Yes.
Even though we know that those are Mediterranean dark-skinned people, not necessarily that they're black, but they definitely have a darker tone and come from a whole different culture. When you think about Israel and the heart of what the Bible is.
Jesus certainly wasn't white with blue eyes.
For sure. But that imagery was put in place intentionally. Because if you see God, if you see yourself in God, it makes you feel if you don't see yourself, it makes you feel inferior. If you see yourself, it makes you feel superior. This is all strategic.
So when you were children, did you see a lot of white Jesuses, pictures of white Jesus? And
we did, but not in our church, because our church kind of taught us.
How did you feel when you saw images of Jesus white? Did you have a feeling? Did it bother you?
It coincides. It makes you feel that white is superior.
Did you actually feel that, though?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
To the point where what am I trying to say? It goes outside of your spiritual life, even into your secular life. You feel that white is right, that white is the standard. I took
standard.
my braids
like that's
out.
normal.
Yes.
We're abnormal. That's the standard.
That's
We're
right.
below the standard.
Yes. I took my braids out for my first job interview. You want to be presentable.
Because braids are not presentable. That's the way it was kind of.
You're supposed to have flowy curls.
Because that's the standard.
And so that's what I did. Or I didn't know, because I saw my mom do it. She did it all the time. Her voice changed when she talked to white people. It was more perky and lighter. Because I do think that black women have a deeper voice just by nature. And one time my son was joking me. He said, I didn't know I did it. I'm not consciously doing it, but and one time somebody said, "Is your name Ganelle or Ganelle?" And I don't know. Because at home, my mom called me Gay Nail. When she would talk to white people, check me in at school, talk to doctors and doctor's office, I'm checking in Ganelle.
Yeah.
So
That superior and inferior complex is there. It has been there. Even we were raised in a church. We didn't have a lot of imagery,
Right.
black or white,
Yeah.
of God and Jesus and everything. But because it was in the world, that's what the fans
Sure.
that we had at the
Sure.
church. I mean, some kind of way, something
It was
creeped
in
in.
something, yeah.
It was ingrained. And the if you go to the bookstore and you buy a book, all of the characters was there. So you got to think, when we're talking about God, we're talking about the supreme one who we are taught as children to bow down
Yep.
to raise, to reverence.
And almost every image is white.
And every image is white. Subconsciously,
Yeah.
you connect that. If you have any spiritual seed or background, you connect that to white being superior.
So how do you translate this to your children today? You were raised a certain way. Your parents were raised a certain way. Obviously, your kids are growing up in 2022, somewhat of a different world. But I wonder how much is really different. I often wonder, that I think we're much more image based today with social media, with all the different pictures we put up. So we've cleaned up really well. We work hard on our image, but I wonder how much underneath that image are we really that different than we were 50 years ago. So do you install caution in your kids?
Yes.
Do you? Okay.
I do.
Okay.
I do. When I say caution that I instill in them, I want them to know the history. They need to know history. And I said it before, history forgotten is a history repeated.
Yep.
They need to know the history. They need to know the progression in places that things have been progressed. Of course, 50 years ago, not 50 years ago, but several years ago, we wouldn't even been able to have
That's
this
right.
conversation
That's
without a level of tension or not having it at all. So I want them to understand progression. I never want them to feel limited based upon history or to live in the past or to live in a state of anger that stunts their growth. But I think it's important, even with my children, that you are aware of history, not to live with a chip on your shoulder or to live in that anger or even to live in fear, but I think they need to know the history to live in the reality of it. So we talk about it.
So it's intentional. These
It's-
are not just subtle things that you do with your kids. You actually sit down with them and go through some of this intentionally.
Oh yeah.
even
we talk
when
about it.
even when you don't plan to, it was one when COVID was like really thick and everybody was basically on the same page about it because it was
Yeah.
new. We didn't
Yeah.
know what it was. We were all kind of like, what is this? We were home and I put a cartoon on a Bible story on for the kids, and this Bible story was made in 2020, and every righteous character was fair skinned. And then when the enemy came, I don't remember what the story was. I don't, but when the enemy came, I don't know if it was Satan or if it was, one of the Pharisees, I don't know, but they were black. And it was so obvious. And that's when I had to have a conversation.
That's very interesting you say that because of just my own, recent readings and conversations like this and classes I'm taking, and it's just opening my mind up to much of what you're saying. In my preaching, I'm more and more aware of how I draw distinctions between white and black, and white is always pure, and black represents sin. And you get dirty with something that's black, and then you want to wash it and make it clean so you're white as snow. And I've just been aware of that. Now we all know that obviously dirt is darker, and when you
Right.
wash your clothes they do
Yeah.
get brighter and cleaner, but I just notice so much of that is dropped in even the way we talk, and I wonder how black children hear and see that all the time when it's constantly used just like that the angels are white, and
Right.
and heaven is bright and clean and white, and all of that, and then everything that's bad, dirty, sinful, dark black dirty,
Right.
those kind of things. It's got to have a psychological effect.
I think, sometimes, like the example you use, some things you just can't help.
Sure.
And I did say one time that white people who, with every good intention, like the example you use, it's like you can't you're gonna mess up in like that example where
Yeah.
I used to love when those conversations would come up in my classroom where other teachers wouldn't like it or would try to avoid it. I used to love it where a white person, a young white boy would say something on accident and would turn red, and a black student would say something. I embraced it because I would stop and have those conversations, and the white student would always be shocked that I would say, wait a minute, y'all, let's talk about this because he didn't mean it that way. You understand what
Yeah,
I mean?
sure.
And I would still have a teachable moment with that student, because I can say Happy Father's Day and offend someone
Sure.
who doesn't have a father, so you still, but though all of these things are good to talk about because I still have to teach my children that everything isn't an offense, and some things are intentionally an offense, but everything isn't as well. So you just all of those conversations are good, and I love it. Some people stray away from it, but I love it, especially in the church.
Yeah. You try to find as many illustrations and examples as you can with your kids when they come home. Do they? I assume you keep conversation very open with them, and if they have they recently, or have they come home with any kind of concerns that you've had to address
Yeah.
because of black and white and
Yeah.
racism and all that?
Yeah.
Can you give
Yeah.
an example of anything like that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My daughter
Okay.
came home a couple of times, and she was playing on the playground, and you might have to fill in some of the details. And a group of girls told her that she couldn't play with them, and one of the girls said, "You can't play with us because you're black." I mean, directly. You need to go over there and play with that group. They're your same color.
See, I just cannot even wrap my mind around that.
This is
year, or
in
last-
elementary school. Elementary.
So what does that obviously say is happening at home?
Well, the interesting thing about this particular situation
Yeah.
is we did have a conversation with the parents.
Okay.
And the parents, of course, was very apologetic and apologetic in tears and many different things.
I really think it was genuine. Sometimes you can get caught being racist, and you can say, we're not like that. We have a black friend, and you really don't know that you're racist.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I really think I read this lady's heart. I think these children are so overly exposed, even when you don't know that they're being exposed to something. And that little girl saw something somewhere that made her say that to our daughter, because we were invited over, later on, and back to the spiritual thing. We have discernment, and we're not dumb. The Spirit of God gives you, it's a beautiful gift.
Yeah.
And there are people who have said they love black people, and it wasn't there. This little girl made a comment that was against that, but we know that she didn't know what she was saying. So they were mortified.
Yeah.
And I think about conversations we've had, maybe political things and other things that maybe our children could have taken out of context and gone to school to say, so I gave them grace.
Yeah.
But yes, those things have happened, and our children have come home.
How did your daughter
experienced it.
respond to that? How did she
was
feel?
hurt.
She was very hurt
goodness.
because this was one of her good friends and everything. She was very
She was
hurt
hurt.
about that. Yeah, she was very
Yeah.
hurt about that.
I can imagine. Well, I think there's a lot of, at least me, listening to the news. Well, let's just back up. A year or so ago, we had a horrible incident here in town where one of our, black citizens was shot and killed by white officers. This is not about right or wrong. We're not getting into
Right.
any of that. But I remember, our city, in some ways, kind of just, there
A lot of tension.
a lot of tension. And that was a small piece of what's happening across our nation, because an incident like that has obviously happened in many other cities, and there's a tremendous amount of anger and frustration and hurt. And what is going on in the black community? Because it I know every situation is different. I'm sure that have been some black young men and women who, not that they deserved to get killed, but they obviously were doing things they shouldn't have been doing and put themselves there. So they're not all innocent, and all of them that got killed, were not, treated incorrectly. But there are many situations that they have been, and there's just an explosion of anger and rioting and I think a lot of people who really don't understand this conversation we're having, they watch it and go, "Oh, they're just angry black people." Look at that; they're destroying their own town. Talk to me from a different perspective. Tell me what you see, what you feel is going on, and what ignites that so quickly. And this is tied to the history, and just help me understand.
Well, there's a lot of different angles that I could go with that. The first one is the African American community loves one another, sometimes to a fault. When it's kind of like my children, my boys, they fuss and fight all the time, But if someone else comes and says anything to them, they will band together to defend one another.
Right.
And that is the love that the African American community has for the African American community. We'll deal
whether they're right or wrong.
Whether right or wrong, we'll deal with the wrong in-house internally. But there is that,
And we do.
There is that love there. And then in this particular case with Andrew Brown, there's this thought that the police did not have the right to be the police, the jury, the judge, and the executor.
Sure.
So that sense, and you got to understand it happened in a climate where the tension was already thick in the country.
Yeah. Right.
So to see it happen in your backyard, everybody gets a little, we're angry, we're upset.
Yeah.
With that situation, I think there's a lot of conversations that go on internally. There's a lot of the African American community is a community within its community within the community, and because of history, we have had to band together as a community of itself, because there's this tone that if we don't defend each other, nobody else will.
Yeah.
But we do have the conversations. We do have the conversations that we have to stand for righteousness. So it's not that situation. From my perspective, and like you said, you don't speak for all of the white community. I surely don't speak for all of the African American community. But that situation was less about Andrew Brown,
Right.
the individual, than it was about the tension that's brewing in the world. It was deeper than.
See, that's what I'd like for you to address a little bit, the tension, because here's what I think often happens.
Yeah.
A situation like Andrew Brown, and we'll use him just as an example,
Talking
of
point.
100 other ones that have occurred. A lot of people in the white community, it's kind of well, don't they see how bad this person was, or what they were doing was so wrong? Judge this as an individual situation. But again, that's where the world views are so different.
Yeah.
What you're talking about is something so much bigger than
Right.
this one situation.
Absolutely.
And you're saying that it's tied to so many other things that have happened for literally hundreds of years. And it's a tension and a hurt.
It brings
and a
out
pain
all of those historical emotions and anger throughout time. And even from a biblical standpoint, even when we're guilty, we live in an age now where the grace of God is supposed to be superior. Now what that means is that grace doesn't overlook the wrong and the sin. I think there's a lot of conversations that we will have, that we are having in the African American community, for how do we prevent these things? How do we educate our children? How do we provide programming and funding for our communities that are disadvantaged? And how do we provide mentorship and financial literacy and literacy in and of itself, so that we can prevent these things? When we see something like Andrew Brown, it's greater than the day, it's greater than the incident. It conjures up a lot of the disparities that I talked about earlier. It conjures up these things because everything is cause and effect. And when we see lack of education, when we see poverty, when we see lack of resources, we see higher crime, we see incidents like Andrew Brown. So the cry is that we want to see resources poured into our community from many different levels, so that we can educate our children and pull our children from thinking that, see, we don't understand, and I'm not going to say that this is my testimony, but I try to intentionally understand, because our church is in a low-income community, drug-infested community, and sometimes you can be so close but so distant from that lifestyle. We don't understand a child growing up and having to take care of himself at 8, 9, and 10 years old, and feel like the only support that they have is violence and selling drugs and everything. They feel like this is their way of survival, to be involved in gangs. We don't understand. I didn't live that life, but I tried to intentionally step back for a moment and not just judge them through my eyes and my experience, to say, how do you get to a place, or someone that's been incarcerated and they can't get a second chance when they get back in the world? So they feel like, though it's not righteous, and that's why it takes someone else to be able to minister, to say there is another way, there is a better way, there is an alternative, and someone that's willing to spend time to help cultivate that. But to understand that the lifestyle, and I had this conversation with my children for Father's Day. Was it Father's Day yesterday? For
Yeah.
Father's Day, and I was telling them they are privileged to a degree,
Yeah.
based upon what generational things that my parents broke, and generational things that they provided for us. They are privileged to a certain degree, but you never want to get to a point where you think that you live in your own box and that you can't see everything is cause and effect. And sometimes those situations become what they become because that's all they know. When you get in a situation where you don't have no hope, and you don't feel like there's any other way to have a decent life, and you're hand to mouth all your life, and you've defended, there's no father in the home, and so many different things. These are generational things that trigger down, that cause a person to enter into that lifestyle. Is it righteous? Absolutely not. But to be able to minister to people, to be able to impact them, sometimes you have to be able to have that sympathy and the empathy and put yourself in their position, and then you can bring them out.
And a black person's mindset, when you talk about, and I know we're just using Andrew Brown just as a talking point, but when you talk about a situation like Andrew Brown, and a lot of non-black people wonder why you can't just stick to the situation at hand. We're just talking about Andrew Brown and what this, that, and the other, and all these other things got to come about, because a black person's mindset, it's hard for us to just stick to whatever. We are a cause and effect people because of all the unmet expectations, all of the historical things that have never been fixed or apologized for. Whoever owes the apology, I don't know. You understand what I mean?
Sure.
All of the things that go through our head, even though he didn't grow up at, in the ghetto or hood life, I did. And although now I live in the nicer community and I don't live that lifestyle anymore, it is, I can't separate when I hear a story about Andrew Brown. I cannot look at that and not see my sons, even though they don't live that way. It's difficult for me. And I know we got to move on, but another piece too that a lot of non-black people have to understand is that with black folks, there's a living room conversation and there's a kitchen conversation. Okay,
Talk to me about
Okay,
that.
so black folks, when we have cookouts and stuff, right, or even at church, it's sad, but we have certain dishes that we keep in the back, and that's the good dishes that only.
I want some of those dishes.
Right. That's
If I come over to your house, I want the
you
good dishes.
gonna get that one. You gonna get that one, Pastor Scott. The really good dishes, like we put cousin so and so's banana pudding out, but Aunt Sam's banana pudding, hers is the best. We're gonna keep that in the back in the kitchen. Only certain ones can get that one. So my point is, in the living room, you have everybody talking, but you pull if you want to say something to somebody, because we are protective of our people too. We don't embarrass one another. You pull so and so in the kitchen to say certain things, and like Abel was saying about protecting and not embarrassing each other and not disagreeing.
Yeah.
You can talk about, like, I can talk about my sister, but you better not.
Yeah.
That conversation that happens in the kitchen, and even surrounding that situation. No, we didn't think that everything around it was 100%, in the wrong of this party or that party, but we're not going to have those conversations in the living room. You know what I mean? If you can read between the lines. So,
Absolutely.
that's just the type of people we are. And it's hard to separate that. When I look at a situation like that, or a situation like George Floyd, it's hard to not see my own children.
Yeah.
And love, the Bible says love covers a multitude of sin. And that's when I was going back to my point that I was making about there's an internal love, because we've had to stick together I'm talking about just from a culture standpoint now. So because we've had to stick together, there's a certain love that comes with that. But that love also causes us to have a conversation, this is like my wife and I. We don't deal with our issues in the public.
Right.
We go in, close the door and talk about some of those things. But it's not that we're not having those conversations.
Well, it just seems it seems so big. This whole division and racism, and it just seems so huge.
And
like I don't even
frustrating.
know where to even begin.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely shocked. I have a few things that if I talk about from the front in my message, I can almost guarantee I'm going to offend people. I can talk about people's sins. I can talk about marital problems. I can talk about sexuality. I can talk about, but if I start to move into certain things, I'm going to go through the list right now, but one of them is racism.
Yep.
Every single time. And if I come down on a side that seems to support that white people need to change, I'm going to lose a family or two.
Yeah.
Almost every single time.
Absolutely.
Now, it's not as true today. COVID made a big change. We had a lot of people that disconnected from church across our nation. But prior to that, I could almost promise you that I'd have 2 or 3 families that would be upset and leave, because they have a whole different concept of racism in America. They don't see it as a real problem. And it's always concerned me that every time I talk about that. So I feel like, if you remember the story, and I know you as a teacher remember I can't remember the name of the story about the boy with the dam that's getting ready to break, and he sticks his finger in the hole. I don't remember all the details of it, but I just remember that this feeling that the dam is going to break. There's a hole right there. There's a hole right there. I'm sticking a finger in it here. I'm sticking a finger in it there. I'm doing everything I can, but it's going to break.
Yeah.
And that's how I feel about this entire conversation.
Yeah.
I can't believe we're in 2022, and I still feel like we have entirely different worlds.
Yeah.
I could talk about this forever. One of the kind of toward the end question here that I have is regarding church. we're still highly segregated.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if it was Malcolm X or something that said, the most segregated hour, in
11
the
o'clock
nation is,
Sunday.
and it's true. Do you realize that was said?
Yeah.
Do you realize that was said in the 60s
Yeah.
during the height of all the civil rights movement and the fighting and rioting and dogs and, Jim Crow era
Yeah.
coming to an end and all that. And then he gets murdered. Martin Luther King gets murdered. All these things happen. That was said then.
Yeah.
And it's still true today.
Yeah. I think.
Where do we go? How in the world do we begin to breach this?
I think the conversation is difficult because there's this underlying tone is to acknowledge any disparity is an indictment against oneself.
Yeah.
So sometimes we feel like not having a conversation helps us not to be held in contempt of an issue that is a reality. And many times the fear of the thing is actually the thing that you actually bring that fear on when you fear a thing. And a lot of people are afraid to have that conversation because they feel like it's going to be self-inflicting to themselves. And maybe it is. But to acknowledge the reality, or to even if you don't understand it, or to allow the conversation to be had. Because conversation is just conversation. Doesn't mean I agree. Doesn't mean I disagree. It doesn't. Sometimes the Bible says, "In all thy getting, get understanding." Mm-hmm. Wisdom is the principal thing, and sometimes we just need to step back and get an understanding. And I think in the church, you're talking about a long history, and we've talked about some of those things today. A long history of segregation and division, and we went through a certain time where multicultural churches was popping up a lot. I think it's kind of plateaued a little bit now. I think we kind of, with everything going on in the world, multicultural churches was really
like
starting to boom one time. And I know there's plenty of the multicultural churches out there. But I think the difficulty is it comes in a lot of different angles. One, the culture.
Yeah.
Because we tend to cleave into places where we're familiar, because it's a family that's that familiarity.
And in some ways, that's an innocent thing.
Yeah, it's
not
it's not an indictment.
Right.
It's just a reality.
There's many white people who, do not go to a black church. They go to a white church not because they don't like black people.
Right.
It's the culture.
They grew up in a white cultured church and they're used to the music, the singing, the style. Same thing with black people. We've had many come here, but our culture is so different than what they were accustomed to. And it wasn't a bad thing that they left and found a different church. It was an innocent thing. I still think it's a problem.
Yeah, it's a problem, but we're different.
We are.
We are, and it's okay.
Yeah.
We're the true rainbow that represents the covenant and promises of God. God has so many different layers to himself. You know what I'm saying? And it's expressed through his creation. We're different. If we had a heavy Latino population or Asian population, African population, the culture will be different.
Because if I came to your church, I'd have to sing.
You got to sing, man.
Yeah, it's a choir.
But the thing is, so what happens is after a while, you yearn for your culture.
Yeah.
You enjoy other cultures.
And in a lot of ways, that's a beautiful thing.
That's what I'm
because
saying.
we would not want to acculturate the black culture into the white church, and it just gets
and then you don't have no
down.
identity. You don't have no identity
because much of your culture is beautiful. It comes from a rich heritage.
Yes.
The music that you sing is coming from roots of your grandparents and what they went through and the pain and the hurt and all these things. You don't want that to be gone. And you don't want it to be thinned down to where it just is some memory that used to be
So what
true.
happens is you get one culture. In most of these situations, Scott, after a while you're gonna lean to one side or the other.
Sure.
And then one piece is gonna feel neglected, and the other piece is gonna feel neglected. Yeah. I mean, we went through this with contemporary and traditional music.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? Even in the same culture.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was generational differences, and then also you got leadership differences, because you have leaders that say, "Hey, you're welcome," But when it comes time to placing that particular race, and that goes both ways in leadership positions where, you know, we're dealing with egos. We love the Lord, but you're still dealing with egos. You're still dealing with control. You're dealing with all of these things. When you start dealing with leadership and who is on that platform and who is running the operations behind the scenes, there are different ways, you know.
Yeah, and I wonder. I don't know if this is a good illustration or not, but I think about, you know, if you want a really good steak, you typically do not get it at a cheap buffet.
No.
I think this is a great example. I like where you're going.
She's hungry. She's hungry. She's hungry.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
She's hungry.
you know,
She
and if you
stays
want
hungry.
good Mexican food, go to a Mexican restaurant, right? And I think in some ways that is a cultural thing. You know, when I went to your church, and I got a chance to be there a few weeks ago, very passionate, very excited, music, everybody singing. I loved your dad. You know, he brought me up front, and I don't know if you heard what he said to me, but he said, I don't want all that power sitting in the back. I want that power sitting beside me. Just so warm, so friendly. That needs to stay concentrated in your culture for it to be what it is.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like a specialty food item, go to a specialty restaurant for that food item.
Yeah.
It typically gets watered down on a buffet.
Yeah.
Got you.
Everything there is just kind of a
Yeah.
scale of 1 to
This
10.
is
It's a
good.
5.
Yeah.
But if you want a 10 steak, go to a steakhouse
Yeah.
that's known for that. There's no way that what you offer could ever be offered if all the white people came in and started making decisions, and it all got blended down.
It's gonna change.
It would all change. And what you have is beautiful and different and unique. And I'm just, but I still wonder, how we all stay so separated.
So we think about the culture
Yeah.
from that perspective. Then you think about the conversation.
Yeah.
The conversations are different. I mean, even from history, we talked about that. You know, African American history, churches, that's how the African American Methodist Church came to be, because they weren't allowed in the Methodist Church, so they created their own church. So because the conversation, they weren't welcome, African American needs were different. You know, they were going through slavery, they were going through poverty, they were inferior, they were suffering brutality and so many disparities. So when they came to church, our culture was looking for an outlet of release, that God one day was going to deliver us from this and set us free, and we're dependent upon him just to make it through the week.
So whereas the songs in the white church was of a worship of just how good God is,
It's so true.
the songs in the black church was a cry for help.
Yeah. And that thread is still in the church today.
Absolutely.
So it's a beautiful thing going back to it, because the culture is different, the conversation is different. It's just
Allocation of funds would be different.
allocation of funds.
Who's going to spend what and where, and how's it going to be budgeted, and where's the money going to go, and are we going to support this or that?
Yeah. So you butt heads. It's just one of those things that's going to be a lifelong thing. So how do we move past it? Is I don't think we will, and as a
And that's not necessarily a bad thing.
yeah, and that's not a necessarily bad thing. I think the way that we cope is that there are times that and some churches do it well. I mean, I don't want to paint a broad brush.
Sure.
I mean, I'm sure there are churches out there that do it well, do it to a higher degree. I think Tony Evans is one example that he has multicultural people, but predominantly his church is black too.
Yeah.
And I can name some others that do it pretty well. But a lot of times in those circles, if you watch it, they have to avoid certain conversations.
sure.
They don't have the freedom. They don't have the liberty sometimes to say certain things for the fact of offending a certain culture. That's why you got to get back where the word of God has to be the standard. You just say what God say and let it be. But there are difficulties in reality of living together. There are differences, and it's okay to have that difference. So the way that we work through it is we've had Lena come to participate in something at the church one time, and Ganelle's been there. I've been here, and we welcome.
That's what I think more of.
I
That,
think
and let, like if a white minister comes to your church, still be 100% black church.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
and we would hope
Right.
that minister
That's
would
right.
be them. And I
Right.
think in this city,
and enjoy the beauty that
Absolutely.
of difference and learn from each other, because there's things that I can learn from you as I'm doing
Yes.
today, and also in your teaching and preaching,
Yeah.
that I don't see things in Scripture the way you see them, and the
Wow.
way that
Yeah.
that little twist is, and that
Right.
little nugget of truth over here that I never applied that way
Yeah.
before.
Right.
And I need to sit at your feet and
Yeah.
say, teach me, show me.
Right.
And if we can do
Likewise.
that the other
Yeah,
way,
likewise, yeah.
then we can still be white, still be black,
Right.
still
Yeah.
have culture, still have beauty, but learn from one another.
Because I think one thing that offends me, people say I don't see color.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
that sounds good on the surface,
Sure.
but it's actually offensive because God gave us color.
Yeah.
He gave us different cultures and different. He gave us that imagery.
Yeah, because saying you're colorblind
Not for you to ignore the
Yeah,
color.
you don't want to be colorblind in the world. I mean,
No, that ain't a
all
good
the
thing.
different colors are a beautiful thing.
You want to embrace it. Well, I understand what they're saying.
Sure,
They're saying
They're
that
not
they
using
don't-
the color
They're
to-
not good for bias and,
Right,
and
yeah.
injustice and things like that. I understand that, but really they take that deeper. They say I see color and I embrace the differences that God has created. And I want to bring those differences in my world to expand my worldview and expand my own internal horizons. That's when we start to progress.
Yeah.
And we appreciate the differences, but we embrace them as well.
Yeah.
one of my favorite thing to see is when a white comedian goes to a black church and he does his stand up
Yeah.
about what he experienced, or a black
Yeah.
comedian goes to
Yeah.
it's the funniest thing, you know. But moving forward, just even in this city, if we're just more intentional about, you know, our invitations with one another. You know, I've been invited some of everywhere here, Pearl Street Pentecostal, and when we go, everyone is we're ourselves,
Yeah.
you know, and I love it. It's good to see and hear how and it's not just even the color, it's the denomination factor as
Yes.
well. You know, you got the apostolics coming into the non-denominational atmosphere and things of
Yep.
that nature. It's a beautiful thing to see, and just moving forward, being more intentional about inviting one another, having the citywide revivals,
Yeah.
things like that, you
Yeah.
know. Like he talked about the history of things, that is a big factor, because you carry those things even when you don't know it, you know.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. I could talk. You got your kids and other activities going on and plans,
I don't know
and
what they did
I
to
don't
your
know
room at there. but
how the
I'm
green room
apologizing in
look.
okay
advance.
to me. It's okay to me. But you know, I have so many. I could literally talk another hour.
Yeah.
Just questions and learning, and you've been so open and honest. And this is just the tip
Yeah.
of an iceberg that is massive. And I'm not sure where to begin other than what we're doing right now,
Yeah.
and that's learning.
Yeah.
That's learning.
Yeah.
You know, go ahead.
I'm sorry,
No,
but
no,
and,
no,
and I
please.
do I hear your heart, because it is frustrating, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Because it's deep and it's massive, you know. It's frustrating for us because I feel like we're, you know, when we're black, obviously, but and then at the same time, you know, we've reached a level where we're in certain circles too. And when you're in certain circles, you know, sometimes things are said and people kind of forget you're black. And then on the same token, we're spiritual beings first. I don't care what people say, we're spiritual beings having a human experience. So then when you start to talk about forgiveness and making it into the kingdom, and how there are certain things we got to let go and can't carry, other people think you're saying, oh, you got to forget that racism exists, when you're not saying that. You're just saying we got a heaven to get into.
right.
You know, when you talk about loving ye one another, you know, sometimes, you know, if my people feel like we're saying that you got to just forget all that. So it can be frustrating. So prayer, and I know people use prayer as hospice, like, oh, all we can do is pray. No, prayer is the thing.
Yeah.
Is not our last resort, but our only option.
Yeah.
You know?
For his direction. Scripture says, by one blood has he made us all. All of us are connected to the blood of Adam initially, and then of course once we embrace Jesus, we get a new lineage and a new DNA, and that's not contingent upon our skin color. I know
Right.
a lot of people try to base their salvation on a skin color. But Jesus said, "Who is my mother and my father? He that does the will of my father, my brother." Well, and that's really where we are. In the reality of the world we live in, we have a lot of cultural differences, but there's one Spirit, there's one Lord, one faith, one baptism, and that's the beauty of who Jesus is. He broke the wall going into spiritual things toward the veil from top to bottom, and there's neither Jew nor Greek. We're all one in Christ Jesus, and we're connected by the Spirit of God. And that Spirit deals with those things that are in conflict with the Spirit of God, which racism, based upon this conversation, is one of those things. And we have to deal with that from both angles, from white to black and black to white. When we talk about the kingdom of God, because the kingdom of God incorporates all of us who say Jesus is Lord. So we get to have these conversations. She got into talking about forgiveness and some other things. We get to have these conversations, but the only way that we can heal is to have them. You can't heal what you don't deal with. You got to deal with it to heal it.
Exactly right.
Appreciate it.
Well, Ganelle, you write.
Yes.
And you have a writing camp.
I do.
You had a book
Yes.
that came out a few years ago, right?
Yeah. How many? Yes.
Yeah.
2 books.
2 books.
Yes.
Okay. So
Cool Breeze.
tell us the names of the books again.
All right. Cool Breeze.
Cool Breeze.
And was the first book, and Double Dutch.
Double
And
Dutch.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Cool Breeze, it actually kind of deals with judging, people, and these young people kind of judges this man, and it ends up being one of the most amazing nights of their lives. So
that's great.
Yeah.
Well, if anybody wants to follow you guys, I know you're very much on social media, at
Yes.
least Facebook. I don't know if you any other platforms.
I do Instagram
Yeah.
too, sort
Okay.
of.
They can find you there.
Sweet tea and cornbread on Instagram.
Sweet tea with my cornbread.
Oh, yeah.
And that's going to be my next book
Oh,
coming.
good.
Yes.
Well, that's the reason why I brought that up, because she is working on those first books were children books.
Yeah.
But this is going to be
An adult
an
book.
adult
Oh,
book,
excellent.
something.
What's the projection is getting it ready?
well, she's not. I don't want to say she's not working. Like, she doesn't want me to say she's not a teacher anymore. She's
No,
a teacher.
because I'm a teacher.
She's definitely working. Trust me, she's entirely busy. But the goal of her not going to an official job is to eventually
finish this book.
give her some time to concentrate on her writing. So
Good.
hopefully,
Well, how about I just throw out a date and hold myself to
Hey,
it?
there you go.
All right.
make it happen.
This book is going to be done by September.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
She's a writer, man.
That's awesome.
She's
That's awesome.
some people write books. They just it's just popular.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's a writer, man.
That's great.
Yeah, I go and write something. It take me 3 days to write it. I got to go back over and still publish it. Still messed it up.
Yeah.
This girl, man, I'm telling you, man, she's a writer. She's
That's
a writer, and she's not working right now.
Yeah.
But I told her, and she's struggled with it a little bit, because she's worked for 18 years. More than that. She was a teacher for 18 years. She worked all her life, right?
Yeah.
So she's struggling with being a at-home mom.
Because
I'm
I used
sure.
to talk about stay-at-home
sure.
moms like they didn't do nothing.
Yeah, she struggles.
So it's all coming back to you
It's
now.
coming
Yeah, it's
back.
coming back around.
I don't
she
want
said-
people to think I don't do nothing.
And she says to me, "Well, I don't want to, put all this pressure on you." And I said,
Yeah.
"Baby, listen. You're gonna retire me. So I just want to let you know that when I stop working,
Yeah. So hurry up and get that
All
book
right.
written.
That's right. when I stop working,
This is his hope.
That's right. I don't want you to give me any funny faces when I'm not doing nothing. I'm not going to do anything, and I have no bones about it. This is my laboring season.
Yeah,
And
that's
I'm
right.
gonna transition
That's
after a
right.
while.
That's right.
Okay.
Well, we're looking forward to the book.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Pastor.
Thank you for your time today.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
the
And
invitation.
looking forward to continuing to learn from you guys and grow. And looking forward to with knowledge comes power.
Mm-hmm.
If it's truth, freedom.
Yes.
But as Solomon tells us, also pain.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
And when you know things and you see things, it can burden you.
Yeah.
And it can keep you up, and
Yeah.
it can bother you. And I think sometimes that's why some people are afraid
Yeah.
of learning
Yeah.
and asking questions.
Yeah.
This could open up a whole nother adore, so we won't go into this. Maybe we'll get into this next time. But I remember, I think I told you I was reading several different people. I think it was James Baldwin that said something along the lines of that. What he thinks one of the issues with white people is that they're just afraid.
Yeah.
There it is.
They're just afraid.
Yep.
They're afraid of the black man, the black woman, truly coming into their freedom and their
Liberty,
liberty,
and
and
if it's
totally
going to take something away from them.
yeah. And I absolutely believe that.
Yeah.
Wow.
I believe that. So that's a whole nother conversation on how do you combat that kind of fear. You know, because we deal with fear, no doubt. You have kids, you know, they have fear at night, or maybe they have a fear of something, and you pray with them, and you teach them how to deal with their emotions and not be afraid of certain things. And you know, we might be afraid to step out and pursue a new job, or you know, a degree, or that's a certain kind of fear. But this pervasive fear that has literally infected a race of people for hundreds of years. How do you deal with that? You know, how do you deal with that kind of fear?
Yeah.
So that's a huge undertaking. So maybe we'll pick that up another time.
Yeah,
I'm
we'll
gonna
have to.
offer one piece of hope.
Please.
Eden's friend, she told me that they have plans of getting an apartment together when they grow up.
Oh, that's
so
great.
they are fine.
That's great. All right, guys, thank you so much, and looking forward
children
to.
work things out.
Yes.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
That's that childlike nature.
Yes.
If we can just teach that.
That's that we become as children.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, guys. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor
You're
Scott.
welcome.